The overcast seam is very similar to the zigzag seam, but some of you will be going to the mission field and your sewing machine will not have electricity. It will be foot pedals and it will not have a zigzag stitch. But you look at your fabric and you realize that the seam really does need the same kind of a stitch that would be a zigzag stitch. Or you have a fabric that is very fragile, that you know that one layer of that fabric would definitely be eaten up by the feet dog on the sewing machine. We again start with the 5/8 of an inch seam that is pressed open. We will take it to the sewing machine and we will make a row of machine stitching close to the edge on both sides of just one layer of the fabric. And then the remainder of the stitching will be done by hand. I am going to choose to use a contrasting color of thread. Normally, the thread needs to match the garment that you're working on. You want it to look nice. You don't necessarily want it to be obvious. And so we are going to take the thread that we're going to use for the overcast stitch. When you do hand stitching, it works much better if you cut your thread off at an angle because you have already started to encourage it to go through the eye of the needle. Now, there are several ways to encourage the thread to go through the eye of the needle. One is that you can use saliva. It's not particularly sanitary, but it works. The second thing that you can use is to use beeswax. That's what this is. And beeswax does two things. It stabilizes the thread so that it doesn't have the little fringy, linty edge. It also strengthens the thread. And so if we're sewing on buttons, which we'll do at another point as we're doing our samples, we will want to use the beeswax so that we can strengthen the thread so that it does not easily come off of the button. Thread the needle, and while it is helpful to make sure that the thread is going to stay in, we do not want to have it so strong that if we put tension on it, it rips the fabric instead of the thread pulling off. And so we are going to use just one strand of thread with a small knot at the end. Now notice I made just a little loop and pulled it through. We do not want a wad of thread at the bottom. The rhythm for the overcast stitch, we are going to do all of our stitching from the right side. When I learned to sew, my mother was very careful to help me learn to sew with a thimble. I would encourage you to do that because it saves your fingers, and if you ever do any kind of fine embroidery or if you do tailoring at some point, you have to use a thimble or you will have a very pricked finger. We are going to then start just to the left of our row of machine stitching. We're going to hide the knot on the wrong side of the fabric, and we're going to then pull it through to the right side of the fabric. All of the construction will be done on the right side of the fabric until we reach the end of our seam. As you look at the completed sample, you will see that the thread is at a bit of a slant. And that is what we're going to do with our stitching. You will also notice that I did not make a really long thread, and that is done to keep my sanctification. Because if the thread is too long, it is more likely than not going to get a knot in the middle of it, which is going to test my fruit of the Spirit of whether or not I really am practicing all of the things that I need to practice. We are going to then lay our thread at a slant, go back to the wrong side, push our needle through, and as we pull it through, we want our tension to be strong enough to pull the thread through, but not so strong that it puckers it. Notice if I pull this really tight, I'm going to pull the edge of the fabric in, and I don't want that. I want it to be flat. I'm then going to put my thread at a slant. Again, come in from the wrong side, push my thread through, lay my thread down. And I'm going to continue doing that with the intent of keeping my stitches as even as possible. We want it to look tidy. We do not want to be so melancholy that it takes us 6 hours to travel 6 inches of length. When we reach either the end of our thread or the end of the seam, then we are going to put our thread, after the last stitch, we're going to put it back through to the wrong side of the fabric. At that point, we're going to pick up one of our machine stitched stitches, and we're going to have a loop. We're going to put the needle through the loop and pull it snug but not tight. And then we're going to do that one more time to secure the knot. As with some of the other part of our construction, we want it secure. We do not want it so secure that if there's stress at that point, that it tears the fabric rather than the stitching coming out. Often what will happen with a beginning seamstress is that they get the process done, but they cut their thread a little bit too close to the knot, and so with a little bit of wearing, the knot comes untied. So what you want to do is just leave a little tiny tail after you cut your thread, or before you cut your thread off, just a little tiny tail. For our overcast seam, we have the regular 5/8 of an inch seam. We have the row of machine stitching, and then we have the hand overcast on either side of the seam, just going through one layer of the